The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer, and I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey, and I am here with Dr. Juan Rios, LCSW. And we are just going to give everyone just a minute or so to jump on. I see that we are still getting people logged into the system. So I want to give people just another minute or two to do so, and then we will get started with today's presentation.
Well, Jen, you didn't introduce your co-host back there, so.
Yes, for all those watching, my co-host is Michael. And for those of you who are also living and working and homeschooling, if your children are there, bring them in close. They're welcome in this conversation. Mine will pop in and out. All right, so I still see a couple people joining, so give us just one more second, and then I'll kick us off with some of the housekeeping items.
Jen, you're looking mighty comfy right now.
Yeah, we are.
That's good. That's good. That's great. I mean, this is the time. If any time to be comfy, it's right now.
For all of those watching today, if you haven't gotten out of leggings and a hoodie in the last 9 weeks, you're my people. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Again, everyone, welcome to today's conversation, Parenting Tips During COVID-19. My name is Jennifer, and I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey. And I am here with Dr. Juan Rios, LCSW, and we're here to have a conversation about parenting during this crisis, tips and tricks of how to survive, things that you can do to stay sane, and just give everyone some tools in terms of managing this crisis and navigating it as well. So a couple of housekeeping items. So everyone, we have over 600 people registered for today's conversation, which is phenomenal, but everyone will be in listen-only mode. On the side, there is an opportunity to ask questions, though. So if you have a question, type them into the question box. I will see them, and we'll stop at a couple of points during the conversation and read them. I do think that we have the ability to bring people online. So if you have a question, you'll see also the ability to raise your hand. So please do that, and we will try to unmute you at a couple of different times in the conversation as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you, Dr. Rios. Welcome and thank you so much. I know you're a parent as well, and I can't wait to hear all of your tips and suggestions and pick your brain.
Absolutely. So Jen, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to really have more of a conversation with folks out there, especially parents who are really dealing with a very unprecedented issue. I don't think there's enough conversation surrounding best practices or just practices in general. So really, I'm looking for this time to be a collaborative space in which folks out there can really share ideas as to what's working. Because this is so unprecedented, there's really no manual, there's really absolutely nothing that says, well, what parenting in COVID, this is what you have to look forward to or do. So we, as a society and a collaborative group, have to be able to make sure that we collect as much data points as possible in order for us to just have practical resources. There's theoretical models that are out there, but are we as parents are sort of talking to one another? And this is really what I hope to accomplish today. So with that said, just a brief introduction into who I am. As Jen mentioned, my name is Dr. Juan Rios. I'm the current director of the social work program at Seton Hall University, the master's program specifically. I am also in private practice. My area of expertise has mainly been surrounding treating individuals, families, and couples, specifically folks in urban communities and people of color. I've spent the last 12 years as a parent educator as well, working with a lot of families within our marginalized communities. So it gives me experience of being able to work with a diverse group of families. But no education or experience has been more fruitful and knowledgeable than being a parent myself. And I know that's kind of a controversial question because there's many folks out there who are parent educators and are not parents, which they still have a great depth of knowledge and information and useful tools out there to help parents, but I think there's also these nuances through experience that helps connect us to some of the struggles and some of the identifiable benefits when it comes to parenting. So with that said, I want to first kind of begin our slideshow. And I think this really embodies what many parents are feeling right now. And for those of you who could empathize with this feeling every morning, with sort of your kids waking up this way, send a message in the chat box. I really want to be able to have folks talking and chatting with one another. You are your best resources. This is a forum for us to be able to express what's happening, complicate narratives, because there's no one way of doing everything. And we're watching social media, we're listening to other parents and family members talk about what they're doing, and oh my God, you know, this is horrible or this is great. However, your experience is unique to you. So let's start chatting in the chat box and start sharing what are some of the tips that are working with you. Now, I will probably not go through the entire presentation, and if we do, that'd be awesome. But I would really like to focus on a conversation between Jen and I. And I'm going to start, you know, periodically, as Jen mentioned, just be able to ask her questions. I would, you know, I open her for her to stop and ask me questions. I would love to ask audience members. So we're going to start with understanding the complex family systems. We're going to have narratives from parents. So throughout the past few weeks, I've been taking qualitative data, if you will, from friends, family members, clients, and patients in regards to what has been working for them, what are some of the experiences, what are the worries and struggles, so we could also notice what are some of the reoccurring patterns. So of course I didn't take all of the data, the qualitative data I have, and you know, I'm not going to post it up for you during this presentation. So I just isolated some of the most important and interesting conversations or disclosures that I have obtained. So maybe it'll help with the conversations. We're going to talk also, we're going to break the conversation and questions into 3 age groups, 0 to 5 years. So in order for parents who have children from 0 to 5 years old, I'm going to say folks who are parents for children 0 to 5, you guys just post up what are the things that are helping you, what are some of the things that you're struggling with, what are some of the websites that you're using, what are some of the other areas in which you find that are important. Then we'll go to 5 to 12, 13 to 17, and then we'll also end with some very important self-care tips, as well as parenting tips that I think would be important for everyone. Now, so Jen, right, when you think of parenting children, right, what's the first image that comes to your mind?
Right now it's chaos, just chaos.
Okay.
The first image is my house a disaster and all of us standing around going, "What? We don't know what's going on."
All right, chaos, right? Like we're all sort of in the state of uncertainty, right? Dysregulation, worry. But are we talking about families who are more complex as well? So there's layers to this, right? We think of families and we think of this traditional, I don't know, 2-parent, 2.5 children household and during COVID. But what about single fathers? What does that experience look like parenting during COVID that may be different? Single mothers, right, who may not have the support system, and you have, you know, a child or multiple children under your care, and you're not necessarily having this sense of support from each other or access to resources. Then we also have to consider, what are the blended families going through. So these are parents who may have remarried, and when you think of moments where now you're spending this much time with your children in isolation, how are the parenting roles shifting? Who's now being more authoritarian? Who's being authoritative? Who's being passive? And are these passive conversations that are happening affecting their family system? Right? I have yet to see any information or tips on what our LGBTQ family systems going through right now, right? So for those of you who identify with this population, I would love for you to chat in the box, send some questions, send some tips. Also send what are some of the complicated issues that are going through that we're not considering, that we should consider as a society. And my wife, she is a DCPMP worker, and another area that we have to consider that she's been expressing to me, where a lot of parents are having difficulty, are foster families. Children no longer have, this face-to-face visit with their family of origin, and now we're looking at layers of isolation for children. Their family of origin, sort of physical contact and support through periodic visits. Are the conversations now a little bit more limited? And what are we thinking about, such as attachment for foster families? What about the foster parents who now have to hold space for all of these complex issues with not as much support and resources that they would have access to prior to, that are no longer available? And grandparents. So now let's conceptualize, what does it mean to be a grandparent, parent younger children who want to go outside for a bike ride, right? Jen, you went outside for a bike ride the other day or yesterday, and I can't wait for you to tell us what happened, because our hearts are with you. I know something very difficult have happened, and if you care to share, you'll share. But those are, what you experience, what grandparents are experiencing, is this challenge of being outside and being active, and recognizing that there are consequences that will happen, whether there are emergencies and having access or not access to help when those emergencies happen, or being at risk of contracting COVID as a parent who identifies within the elderly population. And also, well, are we discussing what are some of our children with special needs out there? Are really the most vulnerable population, children who may have before had adult daycare services or respite services for parents, and what's happening there, and how are they experiencing these complex and challenging issues? So with that said, I would love to take a minute and kind of answer a question, or maybe we can have someone on the line. Jen, is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a couple of questions coming in. So for those of you who are raising your hands, I'm going to get to you in a second. There are a ton of questions coming through the chat box as well. And I think that we'll jump into a lot of this as the presentation continues. Certainly people are relating to the notion of it being organized chaos. So I certainly appreciate that. Glad to know that I'm not alone. A lot of parents on today who have young children, 8 months old, children purchasing toys. Their homes now look like daycare centers. Single parents with special needs children are joining us today. And one of the first questions that we had in was, how do we help parents help children who are beginning to exhibit signs of anxiety because of COVID? What should we be looking for? What should parents understand about how anxiety is presenting in our children? And how do we help our children who might be experiencing this for the first time? So thank you, Tony, for that question.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. Awesome. Great question. So we know one thing is that by first identifying within us as parents what's happening physiologically is probably the first step, right? So many of us don't have the language uh, to differentiate what is anxiety, what is not anxiety, what's the difference between anxiety attack versus a panic attack, and how does that manifest in the body, okay? So first, let's recognize it within us before I go into how do we recognize it within our children. So the first step is for us to recognize what are our trigger points when we wake up in the morning. What are those moments in which we see that our thoughts are racing, we're not necessarily responding in the same way and with patience as we used to, and what's manifesting within us? Our hands are shaking? Is there looping thoughts? Our shortness of breath? Okay, constant worry. And how are we sleeping? How are we eating? How are we having conversations? Okay, because we want to be able to differentiate what anxiety might look like within us, because sometimes it can also bleed into depression when we start to have a sense of hopelessness, like things will never change, things are going to get so much worse, we're catastrophizing to another degree, we're now beginning to withdraw. All right, so we want to first understand those differences. Now within our children experience anxiety through dysregulation. And dysregulation is a fancy word of just saying that they're not in their bodies. They're, so a great example is when you tell your kid, and I'm sure Jed, you just might have done this, is when you tell your kid, no, we cannot go outside, okay? But I want to go outside, but we cannot go outside today. Tomorrow is our day to go outside. Today we're not going outside. So how does that manifest? So they manifest with repetitive questions like why, bargaining, and then lastly, they lose physiological control, right? They just throw themselves against the ground or against.
Have you been watching my house?
Oh. Technology, cameras can see everything.
Juan, I cannot hear you, so give us just 2 seconds. I'm not sure what's going on.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're back. There you go.
Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened. Okay, but so going back to losing physiological control of themselves and it becoming more and more frequent. So that's another indicator of understanding that there may be some anxiety issues happening. So what are some of the tools or tips that we can do as parents in order to help reduce some of this anxiety? Now, again, this all varies depending on the age of the child, depending on the child's special needs, and as to what your approach is. But we always want to work anxiety with the body. Okay, anxiety, you want to work it through the body. That means just being able to adapt tips and tools to self-regulate. And it first starts with our breath. So there's a great tool. I used to work with children who had anxiety. I used to tell them, especially when they were dysregulated, I would say, imagine a bowl of sancocho. So I'm part of the Latinx culture, and one thing that we love is a bowl of sancocho, kind of soup. So I would ask them to visualize a bowl of soup, close your eyes, breathe it, smell it in deeply, okay? And slowly cool it down, right? So this is helping them, it's a playful way of helping them just go into breath. And let's get our bowl of soup, let's have some sancocho, and we'll and a playful way of being able to first work with their breath in order to regulate their bodies. And everyone sort of has a different way of imagining what this may look like with their children. But this is one of the ways, especially with school-age children, you can engage in play as a way of working with their anxiety, inviting them into yoga practices that you may establish. Being mindful that there are some tools out there, such as mindfulness tools. I use Calm that have meditation specifically geared towards children, but being able to, one, model, and two, be mindful that when you're noticing the anxiety, it's in your body. So finding out what ways can you implement self-regulation tools, such as breathing, such as in-house exercising, or just getting the dancing to be silly, to really let that out and just let it out in the household. All right. So I'll pause there. I could talk about this a lot. So I'm curious if there's another question that might have come up before I move on to the presentation.
Yeah, well, certainly people are definitely responding to the visualization and grounding skills,
Mm-hmm.
visualizing flower breaths, imagining flowers outside. It sounds like a lot of you also see this in your children, the frustration about not being able to go outside and just saying no. I certainly see it in my household some days. And at least here in New Jersey, I know we've got people from all over the country on, but in New Jersey, it has been raining for days.
Yeah.
So some of this is really difficult, so we empathize with you. Other questions that have come in, I'm just scrolling through, there's quite a few of them. One of the questions that we've gotten a couple of times, how do we help parents balance managing the mandate that kids participate in virtual remote learning? And how do we help our children navigate what this new school environment looks like and the exhaustion that's new in this new virtual learning world? We're overwhelmed, parents and kids.
Yeah. So I definitely empathize with that. There isn't one clear answer as to what can we do. This is the one thing we could do to help children normalize. I think first conceptually is recognizing that any change, especially regarding our normalcy, will create and cause organized chaos, right? This is a collective experience. Some things that, depending on your school child's age, and I'm going to go into some examples of what parents have been doing as well, that it may spark some ideas of what other folks have said. I would definitely like to hear a diverse group of voices in the chat box. One way in which, having us adjust to this experience is, what are the messages we are sending our children about what is happening, and having a conversation about what is actually happening. Many of our children do not know, why we're remote learning, and don't fully understand that. And in order to help, balance a lot of this teaching, working, mothering, fathering, husbanding, wifing, all of those different roles that you're doing, is also to be able to create boundaries. So that means boundaries with your children, boundaries with your spouse, boundaries with your work, and at times all of that just tends to bleed out. Okay, and in one of my slides, I'm gonna one of the parents mentioned that a great tool that they've used is integrating technology as a support for teaching, not just teaching, but keeping boundaries with their children. So someone would utilize Google Home or Alexa, and they would say, well, Alexa, set the timer for this and tell the children, well, we have this time for you to play or dance. When the timer goes off, we're going to move to this. And making sure we take frequent breaks and using these timers so that children can have, you can set expectations, so it doesn't, it's not just this, can I be done yet? Do I have to go? You're allowing them to take ownership over some of that, and releasing some of the responsibility and saying, well, we're not done yet. Did the timer go off? Did Alexa say it's time yet? And that's some of the things that I've seen and have feedback from parents as far as what they're doing.
I will just echo that Alexa and Google Home are the great timers in our household, as well as a really great source of entertainment and asking questions. Alexa knows a lot more about Common Core math than I do.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know about you, but I cannot, like some of the stuff that they're learning, I'm like, how do you, I have a teenage daughter, right? And my daughter's 16, and she's in Calc 3. And it looks like a foreign language to me. So don't even show it to me, send it to me. I'm like, yikes. I didn't get that far yet. But that's also, that's an additional area which we're not discussing, is the competency of parents teaching, right? Many of our parents, English might not be their first language. Many of our parents, have children where they surpass them in that level of education, and asking them for support and feeling less than, because now they're at home with their children and parenting and teaching. that they may not feel 100% comfortable sitting down with them and attempting to be an educator. And that's a role that many parents are thrust into. So I'm going to go into a little bit of what are parents saying. Okay. So this is a bit about what parents are experiencing. This is, again, qualitative data that I've collected through many parents. About 50 plus parents have responded, and this is just some of the responses that what they're experiencing right now. Loneliness, okay. Worries if there's going to be any shortages, not understanding what's going to happen in the next, few months, economically, whether kids are going back to school in the fall, being frustrated about the reality that we may not be able to go on vacation. For parents, the summertime is their respite with their children. School's out, parents take a few weeks to go, visit relatives, to go camping. Who knows what's going to happen? And that brings up a level of anxiety within us because guess what? Our self-care with our families are now being jeopardized. And that's some of the worries. And again, parents wanted to help their parents. So there's this parallel process that's occurring. There's you parenting your children, and then you having to worry about your parents. So you're like sandwiched in to that anxiety, right? You have to be present and give, and present and worry. Therefore, there's this phenomena that's occurring that we're also not discussing. And what about parents who have lost family members and are able to properly grieve with their children? Okay. And this is what we feel like. this is sort of what internally we're angry now. We're angry at what's happening in the situation. We're angry about folks who are not wearing the mask and going outside. We're angry about the economy. We're angry about the government's response. And I like to say that anger is really truly a masking emotion. There's always something underneath anger, right? There's hurt, disappointment, betrayal, sadness. So when we start noticing that our children are angry or we are angry, be able to sink into that feeling and recognize, well, what's really happening within me? Is it really that I'm angry, or I'm disappointed about certain people not being responsible during COVID? Or am I sad that I can't hold my parent like I'm holding my child? All right, so there are those parallel processes.
Can I just interject here for a second?
Yep.
I think one of the things that we see, and a couple of people have mentioned it in the chat box, is that anger presenting in our children as well. And I know I see it in my own children, and I'm sure some of you watching do as well, that we have friends who might not be holding the shelter in place and the social distancing as closely, or following it to the letter of the law as closely as we might be. So, we'll see across the street, my neighbors have friends over. We know they don't live there. They're coming and going. And then there's anger from our children that, oh, well, they're doing it. Why can't I do it? And I think that's so true. It's not about necessarily an anger, but they're feeling the loss and the frustration. And they're also angry because I'm not going to let you do it. But, and any thoughts on, how we help explain that to children, or help them sort of get past the anger and understand that it's really a different emotion that they're feeling to process that?
Yeah, so this is, again, it varies within ages, but one of the most common, techniques and tips is something we call a bait and switch, which is, it's a lower level of kind of a FOMO effect, right? Like you said, your son looks outside and sees that oh, there's people coming over his house. Why can't we go over there? Can I find my friend Jimmy? And really trying to bargain and say, well, just be a few hours, right? But one, being able to, you as a parent, reinforce what's important to your family values, okay? Because your family values are not their family values. And many children won't understand that. But being able to bait and switch, which is the concept of, well, we can't do that. What is it that we can do? What do you want to do, right? Giving them options, not just this whole like, okay, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to go outside and play with so-and-so. No, we can't do that. But here's that we can do. Here are your choices, right? And limiting down one or two, so that way, you know, that you're empowering them to make those decisions, and you're not the bad guy. Because what happens is that when you say no, 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 then he's angry at mom, just as we're angry at them, just as we're angry at the government and everyone else. But we want to be able to empower our children to make what's in their control, just as what's in our control. And what's in our control is, yeah, we could be like them. Sure, of course we can. But then what are the consequences? And for our children, they could decide off of these two options that we give them as alternatives. And if they don't choose, then what are their consequences? That they are choosing not to do anything. And then we have to be okay with sitting with that and letting them self-regulate on their own, that we can't just jump in and fix every child that's dysregulating it all the time, that this is going to be a challenge, Yeah, yeah. So here are some of the just parenting philosophies that we always kind of hear in general, that parents are teachers. And this is something I've been teaching way before COVID. I really credit this to the common sense parenting model that I've been trained in and been teaching to other parents for 12 years now. And that is that, you know, we have to be the ones to model for our children what is good behavior, what is self-regulation, what is being able to cope. How do we teach? How do we create consistency? Because for a lot of years, for many of us, our children have spent so much time in schools that they've been parented by their teachers more than they've been parented by us, in the sense of time, right? That the teachers spend more time with our students than we did at home. By the time they get home, we have a span of like 3 hours with them. They go to sleep, wake up at 6 a.m., and we do it all over Monday through Friday, 8 months a year. And what this really philosophy is saying is that, well, let's not forget that we are the primary teachers. So one thing that this experience have all taught us is, let's reevaluate what we consider our parenting values at home. What do we consider to be best practices regarding raising our children? And how is it different? Can we be more flexible? Do we have to be a bit more consistent? Okay, being understanding of that, you're always also considering good behavior, encouraging that behavior. So for Jen, yes, there are times when he throws his head back and gives you the evil eye, right, and the stink eye, and but you want to notice when he's helping, right? Those moments that maybe he's helping you put away dishes more now than before. Maybe there's a little bit more responsibilities happening at home. You guys love to bake cookies. I know that. So I know he's always in the kitchen with you baking cookies. So really expanding and emphasizing those good behaviors more now than ever before, because we want to be able to, we're spending so much time with them that if we're only focusing on the negative, then they're going to be, really imprinting that message into their minds. So, yeah. One last thing I want to highlight. Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, one last thing I want to highlight here is family meetings. So this is a tip that we have to move more towards, and I'm not sure how many parents are really taking advantage of family meetings, is getting everyone together and being able to hear their voice about what's happening this week, what our plans are for this week, expectations, who's doing what, to allow voices to be heard, and that often children aren't a part of that discussion. And because of that, what happens is that they become observers rather than participants in the day-to-day experience of COVID. Go ahead, Jen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, those are a couple of things that are really resonating with people on the call today, the idea of modeling and, you know, trying to make sure that our kids see us as good role models and practicing good self-care. Katie shares, you know, it is also difficult though for tween and teen parents and Katie, even parents of 7-year-olds, you know, how do you explain that when school is over, they can't just sit on the Xbox and the computer all day? You want to model good behavior, but it's also really difficult because we're on the computers all day. And after we're done schooling, we have to get back on the computer and to try to catch up on the work. And like, how do you do that? Katie, I don't think it's a modeling fail at all. I think it's so difficult. I don't know the balance, but I hear you. The other thing that's really resonating is the idea of family meetings. And I know for us as a family, we started having loose ones. Ours is 7, so it's a little different. But just coming up with, okay, you can't have sleepovers with your friends, but can we have a family sleep out in the basement and we build tents? My house is a total disaster. But, you know, like I'm putting away my anxiety about the house being a disaster because we want to have family meetings or family campouts. And, you know, flipping that conversation a little bit about like that we liked to do X, we can't do it exactly the same way, but are there other ways that we can do it and, you know, still have fun that might be new?
Right, absolutely. And going back to the Xbox question, so I think this is what I think. What I've been noticing is that we have to be a little bit more compassionate and flexible about what our children are engaging in, but what the key here is moderation, right? So are our children playing Xbox until 4 in the morning? This is a very different narrative than every day kind of playing Xbox for 2 or 3 hours, because we're pretty much doing the same. We're on the computer almost all day, and then after we're done, we're watching, I don't know, Netflix or whatever it is that's happening. So we need to show just a little bit of compassion, but also setting parameters as to what's healthy and what's unhealthy behavior so it doesn't turn into an addiction. And we're just going to be curious as to post-COVID, what types of manifestations of behavior will come out of it that we have yet to understand. However, you know, send yourself some compassion, that there are certain things that just release into the universe, as long as you're not noticing any deviant behavior or excessive behavior that moves on beyond the scope of moderation. And having a discussion in your family meeting as to what that looks like is an important step to start. Yeah. And so I'm going to just go over a few, I think some narratives that are really, really interesting here that I found. So there's one here in the bottom that a parent said, you know, honestly, what made maybe a sigh of huge relief is my partner was laid off, and having him at home allows me to focus more on working during normal hours, because he now watches my child, and also chores have been pretty much split in half, or more like 60-40. So, you know, there's this also this shift of parenting roles that are occurring that for many, for some, it's not all bad. For those who are in 2-parent households, again, this varies, but for many individuals, they say, hey, you know, this is something in which my partner is stepping up and doing a little bit more of. I really like this one from dads. Hear what some fathers are saying, really giving credit to their partner. She's a real MVP. She takes a lot on this role. Hold on one second. Okay, I have to tell myself certain things because, you know, if I don't do them, my partner will pick up the slack when it comes to my child. And if I then don't do those things, she'll blow up at some point, and we'll have an argument about that. So you see the parallel process that's occurring between parents is manifesting at this time more than ever. And you know, fathers who take more of a backseat role are now being conscious of saying, okay, well, let me kind of step up, or if not, it'll manifest within my relationship in other areas, which is important, a parallel process. And one more I want to just kind of go over real here at the bottom. And so one person said, I raise my voice, usually regarding disciplining and parenting. And he says, or give him a cocotazo. and when he talks back and wants to be lazy. So Jed, you know what a cocotazo is?
I know a chacleta, but
All right, so for those parents who you know what a cocotazo is, I'll put it in the chat box. I would love to hear the various kind of explanations, definitions of what a cocotazo is. So this is a way in which uh, some parents have resorted to disciplining, and I'm not using this as a positive example. I'm simply explaining what parents are saying, that many individuals are resorting back into physical discipline as a rubber band to dealing with some of the stress, right?
hold
So,
on,
so
Juan.
huh?
I'm just going to tell you, you have a pop-up of a reminder on your computer that we all see.
Oh, lovely.
Ah, there you go.
The goodness of sharing screens. So when we think about many parents are going back into default behaviors because they don't have the level of patience as normal to deal with the children because they're with them so much now that they're going back into maybe not, I don't physically discipline my child. So many of them are going back into resorting into physical discipline as a way to deal with some of the problems now because the loss of patience is occurring. As we also know, this is a very important fact that there are more and more cases of child abuse that's occurring. And we have to be mindful that if we don't care for ourselves and we're dysregulated, like we mentioned earlier, the woman asked about identifying the anxiety, then it manifests physiologically, and then we'll have a quick response to our children because of our lack of patience, and we'll resort back to just hitting as a quick solution to disciplining, when in fact, if it was any other time, we may have a little bit more patience when it comes down to that. So being mindful that you self-regulating and recognizing what's happening within you is equally as important as to how you're parenting. So let's take some questions. I'll stop there.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many. And for those of you who say you hear a child in the background, yes, that's mine. I'm sorry. That's life. We're sort of living with it. Small house, small children, they run around. A couple of questions. How do we reinforce our current habits during COVID while not contributing to making our kids compulsive as well? And maybe that's around, hand washing and making sure that we're following this, these guidelines, but also not making them fearful of people, so that when we do return to whatever this new reality will be, they haven't developed some of these compulsive habits. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as of right now, there's not a lot of data in which we have resources to say, okay, here are some of the best practices. I could share with you what I've discussed with other parents who have mentioned this. And one thing that, this is not universal, I always have to give that disclaimer, but one of the tips that I've shared with parents that has helped for them has been the use of storytelling. Okay, what we tell ourselves or we tell our children about this, was the narrative we create surrounding COVID, is how they will adopt and adapt. So being mindful or being creative as to how can we share this in a storytelling form, and what does recovery look like, meaning when we get back into society, as to being mindful that everyone is not a germ or a disease, an illness rather, and through the form of storytelling may be a way in which would be helpful in creating a narrative that being safe and cautious is very different than being fearful. Okay, and we do that already with other things. So tap into the examples you use already with children when they start demonstrating a level of fear or a level of compulsivity towards something, as a way to educate and provide that sense of narrative. So I know that's not a clear direct answer, but I think we could find a lot of great resources from what we already have had and done in the past, and I think storytelling is one of them. What do you think about that, Jen?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. I know that we continue to tap into that in our house. It's not about anything different. We're just being ultra, careful these days. And, why are we being careful? It's the same reason that we wear helmets when we ride bikes. Thank God we did that yesterday. Safety first, and making sure that we're cautious has been really helpful in our house. A couple of other questions that have come in, a lot of them around like the kids' use of electronics. If there are any thoughts that we have on how long do you think it's okay for people to play with electronics, and also some people sharing that there's been a lot of research done recently. I know Time Magazine had an article about how video games, electronics, as long as they're age appropriate and parents can control and monitor that, is good for children right now. I will just share with you, I have a 7-year-old and I have a husband who is an avid gamer as well. And we've really tried to keep our son away from video games and online, and he's not ever been allowed to do it. But now during this pandemic, it's one of the only ways he gets to see his friends. So we use Facebook Kids Messenger, and we know who he's friends with, and they awkwardly FaceTime each other while playing Roblox. It's a little strange, and they shout at each other, but it's the only time they get to communicate and play, and my son's an only child. So, for those of you who are also, feeling a little guilty about, oh, my 7-year-old's now playing more video games than I think they should, there's also this social aspect, and it's giving him an opportunity to connect with friends. And in my house, we have a 2-hour-a-day limit, and just because usually he'd see his friends for 2 hours. So, but also mom and dad have learned how to play Roblox as well, so we play with the kids.
Right, and absolutely. So Jen, that's a beautiful example of sort of shifting the mind. We have to be careful that when we think about electronics or gaming, that it's looked at just from a negative standpoint, that it's going to eat your brain, you're not doing anything constructive. It's what types of games are we engaging in? What types of activities are there in gaming structures? So, as you know, I am a futurist, which is a fancy word of just saying that I really love talking about what the future will look like in 10-year time spans, and really identify signals and changes. And one of them in particular is how parenting has changed and how parenting will change. And for example, my daughter's 16 now. When she was born and to her first 3, 4, 5 years, it was about TV. It was saying, all right, how much TV are we restricting? Right? And it was about the VCR and how many VCR tapes he had stacked up from all of the Sesame Street and Elmo. And the only time you will interact with Elmo is when he'll pause on the screen and give you a second to answer. Now kids are actually interacting with these avatars. So it's just being able to shift our perspective, and also for us to engage in those same activities as our children. So if they're playing a game, play that game with them for some time before you feel comfortable in saying, all right, let me just give them free reign for 2 or 3 hours. Get to really phenomenologically know, come closer to what they're experiencing. So you can also experience like, oh, what they're learning is collaborative tools. Oh, what they're learning is strategy building and how to solve problems. And those are fundamental critical thinking skills. And those are fundamental learning objectives that they obtain in school. And sometimes they don't even obtain that in school because they're just learning rote education. So this gives you a really creative time to explore that with them and look at creative gaming in a different way. So I think in 10 years, just think about COVID now. 10 years ago, we didn't have, this massive information and access to technology as it is now. So thinking about what that will look like in 10 years, just kind of normalizing, well, what am I okay with introducing and what am I not okay with introducing? So having a discussion within your family, but also normalizing that this may be a new normal for many of us, and how do we create moderation?
Yeah, I think that's really great. And there's, for what it's worth, it's been interesting for us to come together as a family, and never would I have ever ventured down the road of playing video games. Not my thing, but it's actually kind of fun. And so now we have, family games. We're all sitting around playing a video game together with his friends across town, and everyone's yelling, and they're silly little games, but it's also become one of the things that we can do now as a family that we probably wouldn't have ever discovered. A lot of people have questions, and I think this is such an important thing that we touch upon. Parents feeling guilty for the need and continued need for self-care and just a little alone time during this, whether you're working outside the home and coming home to a partner who's been home all day and feeling guilty that you still need a little bit of time for yourself. Any thoughts on managing that within ourselves, but also how do we have that conversation with family and our children too?
Right. So I'm going to answer this as a parent, and Jen, I would love for you to answer this, because I think there's this thread that we all, as parents, kind of impose upon ourselves, and that's a sense of guilt about being enough. So in the 1960s, there was a theory called the good enough mother, and that was this. It was a dark time, I would like to say, in which they emphasized that anything that happened bad to your child was the mother's fault, which was a horrendous kind of patriarchal way of looking at parenting. And because of that era, we are now, those messages have still trickled down into saying, well, if my child is not okay, or if I take care of myself even, then I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not a good enough mother, I'm not a good enough father, I'm messing up my kids, etc. But let's take it to a perspective of what's happening right now, which is safety, crisis, and an organized chaos. Okay, so if your plane is going down, what does the flight attendant always say? Right? You got to put your mask on. Right? You put your mask on, and then you help your child. Okay, why? Because if you're not okay, you stop breathing, or something happens to you, who's gonna help your kid off the plane? So being more self-compassionate is essential. It's a daily practice. Like for me as a parent, as a father, I meditate on that daily, to allowing myself to be self-compassionate. And I'm not perfect, and that's another 1 hour session right there about parents and perfectionism. And I think we, some way or another, we do our best not to F up our kids. That's the best we could do. That's the best we could do. And there's a theory that we have. Children are going to be okay as long as we don't consistently make mistakes throughout their life, right? We talk about those big things like, I don't know, demeaning them, self-abusing them, but by and large, they're going to be productive people, and we just have to do the best that we can, and being in this, repeating that to yourself, doing the best that I can, and this is okay.
Yeah.
Doing the best that I can, and this is okay, and being able to create an affirmation surrounding that, and releasing a lot of the perfectionism that often we self-impose because of comparative issues, which is another byproduct of technology and social media, which we're comparing ourselves to other parents, comparing ourselves to our moms and dads. So, that's one area where we have to constantly work on. Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with this all the time, and I'm sure that there are some mothers out there, and probably fathers too, who are at their breaking point every couple days. It seems like it's a bit of a roller coaster. And then when you're in the middle of your meltdown, which is totally normal, and everyone's going to have them, particularly in this situation, you've got somebody on social media or in your circle of friends who's like, but remember, this is such a blessed time. And you're like, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Can I let me just have a moment to myself and lose it so that I can get it out of my system. And
Right.
I have been really practicing being gracious with myself and just trying to be like, okay, you need to get away and take a ride in the car and cry and yell. It's okay.
Mhm.
I'm used to having my 30 minutes in the morning on my drive to work with my own self, and I need that, and that's okay. And it's also okay to not be okay every time or not be able to find the joy in these moments when you've been locked up for 57 straight days in a row.
Exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, that's a beautiful example. So, you said it best. Yeah. So, I think we're almost at our
We
time,
are
right?
almost at the end, and I feel like this conversation could go on forever. There are lots of great questions that we just didn't get a chance to have time for. But here is the invitation to come back on and to continue to have the conversation with our community. We have, over 300 people who are on now. We had 600 people on it at one point in the day, and tons of questions coming through. So we know that these are important topics for our community. We know that this is a good opportunity for people to come together, gain some tools, just feel normal about what we're all going through. And I hope everyone here found a couple of nuggets that were helpful. I know I certainly did. For those of you who are watching, this has been recorded. It'll be available on our website. You can share it with friends who are also parenting during COVID, and we will have the PowerPoints available too for you as well. We are conducting these community conversations every week. We're trying to bring a new one to the community, normalizing mental health and just giving people access to the tools and resources and great experts like yourself. So thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for your questions. If anyone has additional questions, or maybe during the next community hour, I'll try to show up and try to answer questions through the chat box as well. You can feel free to email me as well, juan.riosjr@gmail.com. Yeah, guys, please stay safe, do your best, and remember, we're just doing the best that we can, and that's okay.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it, and everyone stay healthy and safe. Bye.